Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We are about to have a conversation with international climate law and governance specialist, as well as director of the Climate Analytics Caribbean, Rueanna Haynes, who is at the forefront of some work that is quite timely and very important. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Haynes. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much, DK, for the invitation. Can I call you DK, by the way?
Yeah, man, please do. And with a jet-setting traveler like you, I mean, it's par for the course. But let's start off, please, in terms of getting an idea of or an overview of Climate Analytics Caribbean, please.
Sure. Well, Climate Analytics Caribbean is the newest of several offices of our parent organization, Climate Analytics GmbH, that's based in Berlin, Germany. The Climate Analytics as a whole, is a global climate science and policy institute that has been working to ensure that we can limit global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. The aim of our work is to essentially save the climate for present and future generations. Climate Analytics Caribbean, we are implementing this overall vision with a focus on climate justice.
And the two things that I want to go into, and I'll ask them distinctly, thank you. What is the importance of having a space that looks at both the science and policy? Because sometimes it feels as though people are across the divide shouting at each other, whether or not it's happening or it's not happening, what we should do with the empirical evidence. So in terms of like the science being interwoven with the policy, what's the impact of that?
It's really key. And I think this is what has made Climate Analytics as an organization so unique. The work began in 2008, exactly with that intent of bridging the divide. I mean, it's a completely different language between those who are researching the climate science and those who are trying to make the policy. And, you know, in the context of the global climate discussion that's established under the Framework Convention on Climate Change, there was a real need to make the science more policy relevant. And so, you know, in order to ensure that the decisions that governments are taking are really in line with what the science is saying is necessary.
And that second question, thank you for that though. Sometimes when your parents make the rules and you need to abide by those rules and you're not able to do exactly what it is you want to. Talk to me a little bit about the fact that Climate Analytics Caribbean has chosen as part of its focus to look at climate justice, please. Is that something that you're able to? Is it a level of autonomy that you have? What is that relationship like?
Actually, no. In terms of the work of the broader organization, everything that we do fits into the same question of the climate science and the climate policy. Climate justice is just a thematic focus that we have to ensure that our work is fully aligned with the realities on the ground within the Caribbean region, where, you know, what we've seen in the Caribbean is yet another disconnect between how we understand the issues here, how we speak about the issues here, and the global discussion. So that's really the space that we are working in as Climate Analytics Caribbean. We have chosen to focus it through a climate justice lens because climate justice is extremely broad, and you know we can address it from many different areas. So there's this aspect of just having the access to information, which is a part of the climate justice drive, ensuring that those who really need the information actually have access to the information. Those who are, you know, the most vulnerable on the front lines are able to understand what is happening, that they have the tools to understand what's happening, ensuring that the climate finance that is available, that people even know that it's available, that we are helping to channel it to where it's truly needed on the ground. So there's no I would say, substantive difference between the tools and the work that we do in Climate Analytics Caribbean and what the global organization is doing, because our work is still very much grounded in the science, in the policy, But what we are doing is making it relevant to the Caribbean context.
Like, I keeping this two-part question together now. So you said it's very broad, but give me a base definition for climate justice. Thank you. And in terms of that information aspect that you spoke about, what are some of those factors that go into saying, okay, well, this is funding, these are resources that are available for these types of endeavors, and how do you link those resources to the persons that need them?
So climate justice, I will say that there is no internationally agreed definition for the term. I will also say that right now, Climate Analytics Caribbean is working with the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute and a suite of other regional organizations in order to precisely create a Caribbean-specific approach to climate justice. But when we speak about climate justice, we're speaking about a few different things. We're speaking about access to justice for those who are being negatively impacted by climate change already. We're speaking about who does what in terms of sharing the burden of having to mitigate from climate change. We're also speaking about intersectionality in the climate discussion. When I first began participating in climate change global negotiations, there was very little talk about questions of human rights, for example, questions of gender, for example, and how these questions of racism and how these issues interact and interplay with climate change and approaches to addressing the climate crisis. And now we are seeing, I guess, a much more close alignment with those discussions. I will say that it's still nascent, it's still developing. I think there are more strides being made within particular regions than there are as yet at the global level, but gender has become a standing part of the discussion. Human rights has also become a standing part of the discussion, and all of these are integrated into what we mean by this umbrella term of climate justice. In relation to the second question, which is on precisely what we're doing as Climate Analytics Caribbean in terms of bridging that information divide, one of the issues that we identified before we opened the office, and as part of the reason why we opened the office, is that even though climate finance is available, it's not enough at the global level. It falls woefully short of what is needed. We need to be mobilizing trillions of dollars globally in order to be able to make an impact in addressing climate change. And right now, the amounts are in the billions. And out of that, what we are able to access as small island developing states is very, very small, especially when you think about the fact that, these are countries that are highly vulnerable to climate impacts. And I mean, the example that's given is always Hurricane Maria when it hit Dominica in 2017 and wiped out over 200% of their GDP. So when we think about the kinds of money that need to be mobilized for climate change, there's a huge gap as well in terms of what countries are able to access. But taking it even another level below that, when we look at Caribbean civil society as a whole that is operating in this space, their access to financing is even more limited. And that's one of the issues that we're hoping to be able to help address as a policy directive for Climate Analytics Caribbean. Any projects that we do in the region, we co-implement with other organizations as a means of getting the climate access to where it's truly needed on the ground.
And on the other side of the conversation, on the other side of the break, rather, I want to speak specifically to Caribbean-specific approaches, as well as some of the initiatives that you are doing in terms of Climate Analytics Caribbean. But just before we take that break, though, we have about a minute. Read and spell for me, please, Ms. Haynes. What are some of those things in terms of like the gender, racism? How are they articulated? Give me some examples of how they may find themselves articulated in the conversation around climate change. Thank you.
Well, at present, at the global level, I'll start there, there's a recognition that climate impacts are not experienced in the same way when we look at it through a gender lens globally, especially when we think about, societies that are in particular more focused on agriculture, where you have gendered roles when it comes to who provides the water, who does the cooking, who has to go out and actually hunt or gather in order to be able to keep households and communities going. Impacts of climate change fall unequally. So in situations where you have drought as a result of the increase in global warming, and you have women who are responsible for the water in a home, it means they have to go further in order to find water, in order to be able to support their home, and in order to be able to support the community. So this is the type of work that is, it has been done, it has been ongoing, but I would say more in regional and more local contexts, these considerations are being taken into account more and more at the global level. In terms of race, we have the conversation, for example, in parts of Latin America and in the US, where you see that climate change impacts are different depending on where you live. And sometimes where you live is determined by your race. So you have poorer communities that live closer to highways, for example, and are therefore more susceptible to health impacts that happen as a result of the emissions of greenhouse gases from cars. So, or live closer to factories that are, producing polluting substances into the atmosphere, into the water, and affecting, having a disproportionate impact on those of a particular race who may be marginalized. So this question of marginalization is key to that analysis. We know that climate change is going to impact those who are most vulnerable the most. And when we look at those who are most vulnerable from a gender lens, from a race lens, indigenous communities as well, it paints a much more vivid picture of what is meant by that.
And with that, we take a short break. Stay with us. We are speaking with Director of Climate Analytics Caribbean, Rueanna Haynes. We return with more.